Happy Halloween, everyone! Beware the witch that flies in the dark of night. As you can see, we're doing a Halloween edition. I love Halloween. It's my favorite time of year because you get to basically dress up as something else and be someone else. And that's really nice when you have something like CPTSD because you're always just so uncomfortable in your own skin. And it's just really traumatic. It's being scared, but you're expecting it to happen. And so therefore it's not scary. But I do find it quite funny when people, even though they know that they're going to get scared, still literally jump out of their pants because they are so scared. I love it. I know for some people that Halloween can be really difficult because you've got people wearing scary outfits, scaring one another, and people suddenly jumping in front of you and going, ah! That can be really terrifying, especially if you have something like CPTSD or PTSD. It's very important to understand which kind of person you are, whether you're the kind of person that really enjoys just getting out of your own skin and just being scared with everyone else and just feeling normal for a little bit, or whether you are the kind of person who it has the opposite effect on you. And so you need to then avoid going out on Halloween and staying indoors, maybe playing music on your earphones, switching your lights low, or putting a sign out your door saying no trick-or-treaters, and just really getting into your own little cave and keeping yourself safe, both physically and mentally. That's really important. It differs from person to person. And one of the things you need to learn with CPTSD is that you can't keep going the way that you have been going. Things need to change. But you also need to look after yourself. Whatever you need to do this Halloween to keep yourself safe, do it. You don't have to do what everybody expects you to do. Just do what makes you comfortable. What is CPTSD? CPTSD stands for Complex Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder. The word complex is key. This means that it is traumatic events that have happened to a person for an extended period of time, multiple events, not just one event. It's usually associated with childhood abuse or trauma, but can be associated with events that have happened in adulthood, for instance, long-term relational abuse and those kinds of things. Multiple traumas that happen throughout your life, which affect how you live in the world. It affects the way you think, the way you feel, the way you react, how you are in relationships, how you are at work, and it impacts your mental health in a negative way. So you can develop a lot of comorbidities like depression, anxiety, OCD, bipolar disorder. There are lots of different things that can be associated with CPTSD. And a lot of times when you have it, just dealing with the OCD or dealing with the depression is not sufficient. You have to deal with the trauma, the underlying reason why you have depression or anxiety. Once you figure out the core memories and situations that cause your CPTSD, you're then able to process the emotions around that and are then able to make more informed decisions as to what you want to do with your life moving forward. No longer be controlled by your trauma, but you are now in control of your trauma. It's no longer dictating how you react in situations, the choices that you make, the way that you feel about yourself. You are now in control of that. And you're saying, hey, trauma, wait a minute. I know that you were there to protect me when I was going through those situations, and I really appreciate that. And that was important. It kept me alive. But I am now an adult, and I now have the tools to be able to make those decisions for myself in a much more informed way. I am able to tell when I am in danger, and I am able to react appropriately in that situation. It's about taking control back, not being controlled. So let's have a look at our signs and symptoms. I've got a little short here, just so that I can read them off, and then we'll go through each one and we'll have a discussion about them. So the first one is difficulty controlling emotions. The reason why this happens is because as a person who suffers from CPTSD, what your brain does is it doesn't process the emotions around the situation, because the emotions around the situation were too overwhelming for you to be able to deal with and still, let's be honest, stay sane and stay safe. You need to understand that that was important at that time, but now it's unhelpful. Now it affects your day-to-day life. Those emotions that you didn't process when you had the trauma, they're still in your body, they're still in your mind. They haven't gone. They've not been processed. They're just stuck and they fester. It's okay to be emotionally dysregulated when you're suffering from something like trauma, but it's also important to understand that that is something that you need to address. One of the biggest ways that you can address that is through learning about emotions, what emotions are, what they do for you, how to process them, and then make sure that you are getting in touch with your emotions and you're processing your emotions. But make sure that you're doing that in a safe environment with a professional who is trauma informed and can help guide you through that process, because feeling the emotions of the traumatic situation to process them can be traumatic in itself. And it's important to make sure that that doesn't happen. Therefore, you need to be doing this with somebody who is experienced. However, the psychoeducation you can do on your own through reading books, watching YouTube episodes. There are a lot of really good content creators out there who talk about emotions, and there's a lot of research out there as well if that's what you like to look at. And that's one of the biggest things I had to learn. Emotionally, I was like a baby, floundering, not knowing what to do, not knowing how to process my emotions, having no guidance on it, because the people who needed to give me guidance in that situation just weren't able to do it. I have to learn it from scratch. I'm not blaming those people. I'm just stating the facts. It's important to acknowledge that this is something you're going to have to learn and work on. And that's okay. Even now, I still work on it 2 years into my recovery. I work really hard on understanding emotions and not logicalizing my emotions or disassociating from them, but really sitting in the emotion when I feel it, allowing myself to just be, to just feel. That is really hard even now, but it's a lot easier than it used to be because I understand more about emotions and I understand the importance of those emotions. And so I know that this needs to happen and therefore I do it. I think that's one of the biggest hurdles with recovery, is not understanding the importance of the things that you need to be doing to look after yourself and manage your condition. Once you understand the reason behind why you need to be doing what you're doing, it's a lot easier to motivate yourself to do it. It's not easy, but it gets easier. The next one is preoccupation with an abuser. What this means is you're so focused on the person who abused you, how they're feeling, what they did, blaming them, trying to understand them, maybe trying to pacify them still, wanting their love and attention, and seeking to understand. It's difficult to acknowledge that you are being abused or have been abused, because when you do that, it makes the person accountable for their actions. If you acknowledge that they're accountable for their actions, you then can't hold on to the shame that you have been holding on to for most of your life. Even though shame is damaging, in a way it's comforting for a person with CPTSD, because that's what you've had most of your life. It's been your friend. It's not been a good friend, but it's been your friend throughout your life. It's scary to acknowledge that the shame is not yours. Sometimes that can be really hard, especially if the person is a parental figure. And you will go through a grieving process when you acknowledge it, you'll grieve the person they could have been. You'll grieve how things could have been for you if things had been different, if they'd been different, if other people had noticed and protected you. And you'll have lots of questions. Why didn't people protect me? Why didn't they listen to me when I told them these things? Why did they just dismiss what I said? Because I'm a child and I'm just trying to get attention. Why didn't the adults do what they were supposed to do? It can be really hard to come to terms with that. A lot of times we get very preoccupied with our abuser. That also helps us to put the focus on someone else rather than focusing inside us and seeing this traumatized, damaged person. Once you understand that you're traumatized and damaged, you then actually have to do something about it. And that's really, really scary. And so sometimes it's easier to focus on another person and try and put the pressure on the other person to change, because then your situation would change. But the truth is that the only way your situation is going to change is if you change. You acknowledge how you feel. You see yourself for the traumatized person that you are. You acknowledge that you were traumatized, and you acknowledge that it did damage, that it has shaped you as a human being, that there's a lot of work ahead for you to undo that damage. That is your responsibility to yourself. Nobody else can do that for you. You have to do it. Other people can support you in the process, definitely, but you are the person that has to do the work. And that can be really scary. Number 3, negative self-view. This is where you've turned the blame inwards. When we are children, we are reliant on our caregivers to keep us safe. So when we are traumatized, we cannot acknowledge that the people who were responsible for us weren't able to keep us safe, because that means that we will be in danger constantly, and our brain just can't cope with that. Then it thinks, well, it can't be the adults. They're looking after me. They're keeping me safe. The blame must fall on me. It must be my fault that I am being abused. It is my fault that my parent is hitting me. It's my fault that my parent says they hate me. It's my fault because I'm not quiet enough. I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. And so if I am quiet or good enough or smart enough, then that will improve my situation and I will be safer. And of course, that does a lot of damage. It does a massive amount of damage to us and our self-esteem. It's really hard. Next one, the 4th one, is difficulty with relationships. When you come from a traumatized background, because you have a very low self-esteem, you are always reacting to situations from a danger perspective. You are not emotionally regulated because you're not processing your emotions. You're just shoving them down. You're disassociating from the situation. It means that when you have relationships with people, they don't go very well. They're unhealthy relationships. You might do things like become a fawner and fawn over the people around you, which for them is very beneficial, but for you, it means that you're neglecting yourself for others, and that has consequences. You're not acknowledging your own needs or wants. When you live your life as a traumatized person, not caring about your own needs or wants, putting everybody else first, that has a negative impact on your relationships, because it becomes this dynamic of you always giving and people take, because you never ask for them to give. And so they think you don't need any, and therefore they don't give you any support. Especially if they're traumatized themselves, they might not be able to give you or understand when you need support. And that can cause a lot of resentment from you, because you're giving all the time to this person. They're just taking. But when you need help and they're just not doing anything for you. And that can really be hard to come to terms with. It's not that the person is necessarily doing that on purpose. It's because of the way that you're interacting with them. You are not expressing your needs. And so they won't know that you have needs unless you express them. We have a lot of expectation on people, but very rarely do we actually say what we need from people. Over time, this resentment grows, and eventually it results in the breakdown of the relationship, whether it's a friendship, a romantic relationship, or both, or whether it's a relationship with family members. Sometimes you might avoid relationships completely as a result of trauma. And that's pretty much what I've done. I've not had romantic relationships because I always used to think, well, people just take from me and nobody gives me support that I need. If I have another person that is relying on me in the same way, it's going to burn me out and it's going to be work. It's not going to be pleasant work. And I'm just can't do it. I don't have the energy to do that because I'm putting all my energy in all the other relationships that I have where I'm just constantly giving to those people and they're constantly taking, but they're not giving back. And so I'm just not going to have a relationship. We never really consider the fact that we might actually have a relationship with somebody who will support us, who will actually show us what a healthy relationship is. And that might change our relationships with others. So it's quite tricky. And it's very important to not blame yourself in these situations. This is just the way that you have perceived relationships as a result of your trauma. This is what your brain thinks needs to be done in order for people to want to be around you to keep you safe. Because as long as people want to be around you, you will be safe. You fear confrontation because if you have confrontation with people, then you think that they're going to abandon you. You think that they're not going to want to be around you anymore. And that is terrifying. You just do what everybody wants you to do. You are what everybody wants you to be. And you never confront people about anything. You never express your needs. You just are a human surviving, not a human being. That's no way to live. It's important to acknowledge that, yes, relationships are important, but sometimes they can be toxic and sometimes they'll need to end. And that doesn't mean that you are a bad person or that person is a bad person. It just means that the two of you are looking for different things in life. And that's okay because you can find other people who will contribute as much to the relationship as you do, who will listen to your needs and support you when you need to be supported. And when you have that, it's pretty amazing. The next one, symptom number 5, hopelessness. This is a really hard one. When you're not being authentically yourself and you're constantly giving everything that you have to other people, they're constantly taking from you but not giving anything back. And you're not acknowledging your emotions, you're not setting boundaries, you're not following your values. You are in essence betraying yourself. And when you are betraying yourself, you become very hopeless. When I started therapy, I told my therapist, all I want is to be happy. I also told her that I hated myself and didn't trust myself. So most of the work that we had to do was to work on my self-esteem and find out why did I hate myself. As I learned more about myself, how important it is to create boundaries, to understand my values, the more I was able to express myself, the less hopeless I felt. Because I started to trust myself again and started to build a relationship with myself, started to express my boundaries to others and had those boundaries respected, it completely changed my view of who I was, what would make me happy. I realized that the true key to happiness for me was to be authentically me. Ever since I have been working towards being more authentically myself, I have become happier and happier. I've learned a lot about myself as well. Hopelessness comes from a place of not respecting yourself, not listening to your own needs. and always complying with the needs of others, even at the detriment of yourself. There's only so much you can give to others. Once you've given everything, what's left? You might think, well, it's easy for you to say. I've never been hopeless. I've been hopeless for a very long time, but I never expressed that to anyone. I was just surviving day by day. I wasn't actually living. It wasn't until I started my recovery journey that I truly understood that and was able to pull myself out of that hopelessness, able to find joy in life again. I was in a very dark place at a point where I just didn't want to live anymore. When you are in that stage, when you are so hopeless that the only way you see to not suffering anymore is to end your own life, is the worst place a human being can ever be. And pulling yourself out of that place is one of the hardest things you will ever do. But it is also one of the most rewarding things that you will ever do. Because once you have been at the bottom of that pit, in that darkness, all alone, and been completely hopeless, but then had a light shone on you and shown a way out with the support of yourself and others, it is a beautiful light place outside, and you can find joy and happiness again. But it's hard work. So find that thing that keeps you hopeful and always focus on that when you are in your darkest moments. Know that you are not alone, and also know that it can and will get better. You just need to put in the work. Symptom number 6, detachment from trauma. I'm going to be frank. My entire life, I lived in complete ignorance. I had no idea that I had been traumatized. In fact, when a therapist told me I was traumatized, I scoffed at them. I was like, I'm not traumatized. People who go to war or have been assaulted are traumatized. I am not traumatized. I've not had anything like that happen to me. Let's talk about why I didn't know I was traumatized. When you are a trauma victim, your brain is looking to try and survive in that situation, but you are physically unable to protect yourself because you are just a child and you are vulnerable. So your brain has to do something in order to make the situation tolerable for you. And sometimes what your brain does is it disassociates you from the emotions of the situation. When you don't emotionally process a situation that happened, a memory, then it's almost like it gets wiped from your brain. You can't remember the memory, because if you remember the memory, then all the emotions will come flooding back and you'll get overwhelmed, and your brain sees that as life-threatening and dangerous. So your brain hides the emotions, and by hiding the emotions, it is in essence hiding the memory. When people used to ask me about my childhood, I used to always say, well, I don't know, I can't remember. I was a kid, so like, why would I remember that? Or I would just have 1 or 2 memories. And no matter how hard I tried to remember my childhood, I just couldn't. Didn't understand why, but I just kind of dismissed it because I was like, well, it was my childhood. It doesn't really matter now. It doesn't affect me now. So why should I worry about what happened in my childhood? That's already been and gone. But what I didn't realize was that even though I couldn't remember those traumatic memories, the emotions were still stuck in my body. And so anytime I was in a situation which was similar to that situation or brought up similar emotions to that situation, I would then react the same way as if I was in that first situation. It impacted my behavior, decisions I made, and impacted the way that I felt about myself and the way I treated others. Somebody once said, once you see it, you can't unsee it. If you recognize that you have been traumatized, then your brain can't hide it from you anymore. Everything will just come flooding back. Your brain doesn't necessarily think that you're capable of dealing with it. You don't have the tools to do that. That can be massively overwhelming, and then that in itself traumatizes you. It's so important to understand that you might not think that you're traumatized, but it doesn't mean that you aren't. When a therapist is seriously telling you you're traumatized, you really should consider it. think to yourself, why are they saying that they think I'm traumatized? What makes them think that? You can even ask them, why are you saying trauma? What's that about? Acknowledging that it's going to be terrifying, it's going to be hard, but it's going to be okay because you are an adult now. You have the tools that you need to be able to protect and advocate for yourself. Just need somebody to guide you on how to do that. And there's nothing wrong with not knowing how to do it because you've not been taught. Just like any other thing, you can't just suddenly start speaking a foreign language. You need to learn how to speak the language before you can then speak it. You have to learn how to do maths before you can do maths. You don't magically know this information. You get taught it. And then you learn the tools of how to do it. And then you're able to do it yourself. Why should it be any different with mental health? Nobody's taught you the tools that you need to help you to deal with the situation. So how would you know how to deal with the situation? You wouldn't. So of course you're going to need somebody to help and support you in this process. That's just normal. Don't be scared to ask for help. It's going to give you a better experience. Trying to deal with trauma on your own is very hard, and you're going to be less likely to recover from it because you need support and you need tools. And the only way you're going to get those tools is if you're taught them. So you need specialists to help you with that. You need therapists, psychologists, counselors. You need family and friends. You need organizations that can help and support you. And there's nothing wrong with asking for that help. Symptom 7, loss of systems of meaning. When our entire life revolves around others and we have a lack of self-esteem and we're not honoring our boundaries or values, then it's understandable that we will lose our system of meaning. We will not know why we exist, what we were put on this planet for. What's the point? I used to ask myself throughout the years, what's the point? I used to get to moments where I was just like, what's the point? We live, we die. But what I didn't realize was that I wasn't actually living. I was just surviving. That's why I had those moments where I just thought, what was the point? Because I didn't understand the value of being a human being, not a human surviving. That's a really important distinction. So that concludes our CPTSD symptoms. There are other symptoms that you can have with CPTSD, which have not been mentioned, but I wanted to just really focus on these ones because I feel that they are some of the signs and symptoms that are not as widely published or spoken about. PTSD symptoms are commonly spoken about. People know about flashbacks and triggering, but nobody really speaks about these other signs and symptoms. I really wanted to highlight them because they are very specific towards CPTSD rather than PTSD. They are really crippling and make you feel really hopeless. What support is available for CPTSD? CPTSD is recognized by the NHS and the World Health Organization as a valid diagnosis. Therefore, you can get support via the NHS. There are organizations like ptsd.org.uk, Mind, and other organizations that you can go to that can help and support you through your CPTSD diagnosis and journey. There is a thing called the right to choose option. This is only available in the UK as far as I'm aware. It is when you go to your doctor and you request that they refer you on the right to choose program because you think you have CPTSD. They will obviously want to do an initial assessment. They will ask you why you think you have CPTSD. You can list the reasons why you think that is the case. Then they will do a referral via the right to choose. What they'll do is they'll tell you to look up the right to choose options that are available for you in your area, and they'll ask you to choose a provider that you prefer, and then the provider will have forms that you need to fill in, and then once you've filled in those forms, you take them to your doctor. Your doctor will then sign off the referral, and it will then be paid for by the NHS. The reason why this was created was because the NHS is overwhelmed. It's not got the facilities that are needed or the specialists that are needed in order to deal with the sheer amount of people having mental health diagnoses. So they created the right to choose as a way to combat that issue. Basically, it's paid by the NHS. The doctors will apply for the funding for you. They will sort all of that out. All you need to do is choose your right to choose provider and go to your doctor and give them the relevant documentation. The nice thing about the right to choose option is actually you can get seen by a mental health professional a lot faster than if you were to go via the normal NHS routes. You can choose the organization that you want to deal with from the options that are approved by the NHS. So that gives you a little bit more choice, which is also really good. So really look into those organizations and see which one you prefer. Different organizations have different wait list periods. So sometimes it might be that you choose a place because it has the shortest wait list. I chose right to choose option, but I went for a place that had a longer waiting list. And the reason why I did that was because they had the best reviews and I wanted a really robust assessment. I went for the longer waiting period because I wanted to go with that specific organization. And so different people will have different reasons why they choose the different organizations, but they are all approved by the NHS. As long as you choose one of them, the NHS will pay for it. And it's really great because you have more choice, but you also have less of a waiting period. Even the organizations that have a slightly longer waiting period, it is much less than you would do if you went directly via the NHS. On average, via the NHS, you're looking at around 6 months up to 18 months waiting list, whereas with other organizations, sometimes it's 6 weeks, 8 weeks waiting period. So massive difference. Sometimes doctors won't want to refer you to right to choose because it costs their practice money, or they think it's going to cost them too much money. A lot of doctors don't know about the right to choose option. Sometimes you have to educate your own doctor on the right to choose option and that it is funded by the NHS to get them to actually refer you to the right to choose. Luckily, my doctors knew about the right to choose and they were actually the ones that told me about it. So hopefully your practice will do the same. They will be informed and able to understand what you're asking for and will be able to help you with that process. However, a lot of doctors do not know about this. It is not through a fault of their own. It's just that they haven't been taught about it. And so it's really important to educate them about it because if they're not offering it to you, they're not offering it to others either. By educating them on it, what you're doing is then, in essence, helping other people because when another person comes in with a similar problem, the doctor will remember your situation and the right to choose option and they will recommend that to that person. That can be very helpful. Frustrating, but helpful. So that's what the right to choose option is. The other option that you can go if you don't want to do right to choose is if you do a self-referral through the NHS. So go onto the NHS website, you look up your local mental health services that the NHS uses for your area. You then go onto their site and there'll be an option to fill in a self-referral form. You send that in and then within a couple of weeks, they will contact you and have a telephone discussion with you about what you need from them. Then they will make the appropriate recommendation. Nice thing about that one as well is, again, it is a shorter waiting period that can take around 3 months to 6 months. Still shorter than the NHS waiting. A lot of times doctors will actually tell you to do the self-referral rather than referring you themselves. It's not because they don't want to refer you or they're being lazy. It is because the waiting period is less than if they referred you. So a lot of doctors nowadays will say to you, do a self-referral to your local mental health services because you'll be seen faster. You will need professional help. It is very complicated. There are a lot of elements there. There are relationship issues. There's thinking and belief issues. There's unprocessed emotions, which will have to be processed via things like EMDR, for instance, or trauma-focused therapy. And you really do need to be guided by a professional. That is so important. You need somebody to be that safety net for you, to help and support you through the process, because it is very hard. And you need help from family and friends, whoever you feel most comfortable asking for help from. There are a lot of physical elements to CPTSD as well. So you'll need a physical checkup from your doctor, find out what physical issues you've got going on and what they can do to help and support you with those. A lot of times medication can be very helpful in these circumstances. Even if it's just temporary, 6 months can be massively helpful to you, just to help regulate your emotions, so that when you start to feel emotions, it's not completely overwhelming. They're a little bit more manageable until you get used to processing your emotions. And then you can go off the tablets so that you can fully process them. Sometimes it requires you being on tablets permanently, depending on your trauma and the effects that it's had on you. Other times it will only require a couple of months of tablets just to help regulate you initially. And then once you've got things under control, you can then be weaned off the tablets. Again, with the guidance of your GP, make sure that you're doing that. Other forms of support, you will need to do a lot of self-help strategies. Sleep can be a major issue, so having a sleep hygiene process is exceptionally important. Having ways of supporting yourself and caring for yourself, things like meditation, mindfulness activities, walking in nature, doing exercise, making sure you're eating healthily. You don't need to diet, but you do need to make sure that you're eating all the right things to make sure that you're keeping your body healthy, so that it's then better able to process the trauma. There are other things that you need to be thinking about, are reassessing your values, developing boundaries, and then how to communicate that to others, how to have conversations around your trauma, how to ask for support, and who to go to do that. There are a lot of resources out there that can help you. Sometimes they can be quite overwhelming because they give you a lot of information. So just break your recovery process down into smaller steps and just take it one thing at a time. You can't cope with everything at the same time. You need to break it down step by step. And if you do that, then it makes it much more manageable. It's manageable, then you're going to be more motivated to keep on your recovery journey. The easier you make it for yourself, the more likely you are to recover. Recovery can look different for different people. And the last most important thing that I would like to mention is compassion. Showing compassion towards yourself and understanding that this is going to be a very long process. You are undoing years and years of trauma. It's not going to happen in just 2 months or 3 months. It's going to take years. But every month you will see improvement. Things will start to get better. Little bit by little bit, it will improve. Just really being compassionate with yourself through this process is exceptionally important, because we live in a society where we are constantly getting instant gratification. It's really hard for our brain to wrap around the fact that this is going to be a really long process. We will have moments where we'll think, oh, I'm fine, everything's okay, I'm healed, I'm cured, I'm not traumatized anymore, everything's hunky-dory, I'm going to live the rest of my life carefree. And then something will happen and we'll dip right back to where we started and we'll think, oh my gosh, and we'll be so self-critical, even though you will have those moments where things will get better and then you'll crash, and then things will get better again and then you'll crash. That is normal. It's a normal part of the recovery process. And it's something I wish somebody had told me before I started my recovery process. That would have been very helpful, but they didn't. When I crashed, it was epic, and I was very critical of myself and really undid a lot of the work that I had done. I had to work really hard to rebuild those things. Whereas if you understand that you're going to have highs and lows and it's going to be this roller coaster ride, you will start to be able to manage the dips better. When you have a dip, it will have less impact on you because you'll be more self-compassionate. You'll also have tools in place that you built during that peak time there to help you to manage the lows. And so it's important to build up a self-care routine and a sleep hygiene process, because those will help you to keep the dips stable and to manage the dips in a much healthier way. I want you to know that you are not alone. Things can get better. They will get better if you get the help and support that you need. It can be really hard to ask for that help and support, but if you ask the right people, they will give it to you. I have put resources down in the description section for you so that you can go and have a look at them. If you have enjoyed this episode, please do subscribe and click the bell notification so that you can be notified when I release an episode. I also have memberships on Patreon, so if you would like to support me in being able to continue doing what I'm doing, then please do sign up to my memberships. I really appreciate any support that I can get, because at the moment I'm doing all of this for free. Please like my videos if you can't afford a membership. Liking my videos, subscribing, that helps me with the YouTube algorithm. It enables more people to be able to see the channel and for it to help others. Well, I hope that this episode has been helpful and obviously Halloween themed. My favorite time of the year, Halloween.